The Strait of Hormuz, the silent gate of global power. Episode 1. Imagine a narrow stretch of water, calm, silent, almost ordinary in appearance, yet carrying a burden so immense that the entire modern world depends on it. This is not just a sea route. It is not just a geographic feature. It is a silent gate, one that controls the flow of energy, power, and global stability. Welcome to the Strait of Hormuz. At first glance, nothing about it seems extraordinary. There are no towering landmarks, no dramatic landscapes that capture global attention. It is simply a narrow waterway, positioned between Iran to the north and Oman to the south, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. But beneath this simplicity lies one of the most important strategic locations on Earth. Every single day, an enormous volume of the world's oil passes through this narrow passage. Tankers, some of the largest ships ever built by humans, move slowly through carefully designated lanes, carrying millions of barrels of oil from the Gulf to the rest of the world. These ships are not just transporting fuel, they are carrying the energy that powers cities, industries, transportation systems, and economies across continents. From the bustling economies of Asia to the industrial centers of Europe, the impact of this narrow waterway is felt far beyond its physical boundaries. But to truly understand the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, we must begin with its geography. The strait is not wide. In fact, at its narrowest point, it spans only a few dozen kilometers. Within this limited space, there are specific shipping lanes designated for incoming and outgoing vessels. These lanes are separated and controlled to ensure safe navigation. Yet even these lanes are only a few kilometers wide. This means that the movement of ships through the strait is highly concentrated. There is very little room for error. A single disruption, whether accidental or intentional, can create immediate consequences. This is what makes the Strait of Hormuz a classic example of a global choke point. A choke point is a narrow route through which a large volume of trade must pass. And when that route becomes unstable, the effects can spread rapidly across the world. But geography alone does not define its importance. The true significance of the Strait of Hormuz lies in what flows through it. Oil, energy, power. The Persian Gulf region contains some of the largest oil reserves in the world. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Iran depend heavily on exporting oil and gas to sustain their economies. And for many of these countries, the Strait of Hormuz is the primary gateway to international markets. Without it, exporting energy becomes extremely difficult. Now consider the other side of this equation. Major economies across the world rely on these energy exports. Countries like China, India, Japan, and South Korea import large quantities of oil and gas from the Gulf. Their industries depend on it. Their transportation systems depend on it. Their economic growth depends on it. This creates a powerful network of dependence. Exporters rely on the strait to sell their resources. Importers rely on it to fuel their economies. And between them lies this narrow passage, quietly carrying the weight of global demand. It is this interconnected system that gives the Strait of Hormuz its extraordinary importance. But with importance comes vulnerability. Because the strait is narrow and heavily used, it is also highly sensitive to disruption. There are limited alternative routes available. While some pipelines exist that can bypass the strait, they cannot carry the full volume of oil and gas that normally flows through it. This means that if the strait were to be blocked, even temporarily, the impact would be immediate and far-reaching. Oil prices would rise, markets would react, uncertainty would spread, and the effects would not remain confined to energy markets. They would extend into everyday life. Transportation costs would increase. Goods would become more expensive. Inflation could rise. This is because energy is at the core of modern civilization. It powers factories, fuels vehicles, and supports the production and distribution of goods. When energy supply is disrupted, everything else is affected. Yet, despite these risks, the Strait of Hormuz has remained open for most of modern history. This is not a coincidence. It is the result of a complex balance. a balance shaped by mutual dependence. No single country benefits from closing the strait. Exporters would lose revenue. Importers would face shortages. Global markets would become unstable. This shared risk creates an incentive for all parties to maintain the flow of traffic through the strait. It is a fragile balance, but a powerful one. Over time, the Strait of Hormuz has become more than just a physical location. It has become a symbol of how interconnected the world has become, a symbol of how geography can shape global power, a symbol of how a small, often overlooked place can influence the lives of billions. But this is only the beginning of the story, because beyond its geography and economic importance lies a deeper narrative, one that involves power, strategy, and the future of global energy. And as we continue this journey, we will explore how this narrow waterway became one of the most critical points on the planet. Because in the world of global trade and energy, not all routes are equal. Some routes are everything. And the Strait of Hormuz is one of them. The Strait of Hormuz, the silent gate of global power. Episode 3. There is a difference between importance and control. And when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, that difference defines one of the most complex geopolitical realities in the modern world. Because this narrow passage is not just about energy. It is about influence. It is about strategy. It is about power. To understand this, we must look beyond economics and into the realm of geopolitics, the invisible game played by nations, where geography becomes a tool of influence and control. The Strait of Hormuz sits at a unique position. It is bordered by Iran on one side and Oman on the other. But its significance extends far beyond these two countries. Global powers have a vested interest in this waterway, not because they own it, but because they depend on it. This creates a complex environment, one where multiple interests overlap, sometimes cooperate, and sometimes conflict. Over the years, this region has witnessed moments of tension, strategic positioning, and heightened alertness. Naval forces from different countries operate in and around the strait. Surveillance systems monitor activity. International attention remains focused, even during periods of calm. Because here, calm does not mean neutral. It simply means controlled. One of the key aspects of this region is deterrence. In geopolitics, deterrence is the idea that strength and presence can prevent conflict. By maintaining a visible presence, nations signal their readiness to respond to any disruption. This creates a balance, a situation where no side wants to escalate beyond a certain point. But this balance is delicate. Unlike open oceans, the Strait of Hormuz is narrow and constrained. There is limited space for maneuvering. This increases the risk of miscalculations. A small incident, a misunderstanding, or an unintended escalation can quickly turn into something larger. This is what makes the strait not just important, but sensitive. Another important factor is strategic signaling. Nations often use actions in this region to send messages, not necessarily through direct conflict, but through presence, movement, and positioning. A naval exercise, a change in patrol patterns, or even strong political statements can influence how others perceive the situation. And perception, in geopolitics, is often as powerful as reality, because perception shapes decisions. Now consider the role of global powers. Countries with strong economic and strategic interests in the region often maintain a presence to ensure the security of energy routes. Their goal is not necessarily control, but stability. They aim to keep the flow of trade uninterrupted, because any disruption would not just affect one region, it would affect the entire global system. This creates a situation where multiple powers are involved, each with their own interests, but all connected by a shared objective: keeping the strait open. Yet, this does not eliminate tension, because interests are not always aligned. Different countries have different priorities, different strategies, and different perspectives on how stability should be maintained. This leads to a constant balancing act, a dynamic system where cooperation and competition exist side by side. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of this geopolitical landscape is restraint. Despite tensions, despite differences, and despite strategic rivalries, the Strait of Hormuz has rarely experienced prolonged closure. This is not because conflict is impossible. It is because the cost of disruption is too high. For any country involved, Closing the strait would have immediate consequences. Exporting nations would lose access to global markets. Importing nations would face shortages. Global prices would surge, and the economic impact would extend far beyond the region. This creates a powerful incentive for restraint, a recognition that stability, even if imperfect, is preferable to disruption. In this sense, the Strait of Hormuz represents a unique form of balance, not built on agreement, but on mutual dependence. A balance where opposing interests coexist because they must. But this balance is not guaranteed. It requires constant management, continuous monitoring, strategic communication, careful decision-making. Because in a place as sensitive as this, even small changes can have large consequences. Another layer to consider is technological advancement. Modern surveillance systems, satellite monitoring, and advanced navigation tools have improved the ability to track and manage activity in the strait. This reduces uncertainty and helps prevent accidents. But technology also introduces new challenges. Cyber threats, information warfare, and advanced military capabilities add complexity to the region. The nature of risk is evolving. It is no longer limited to physical disruption. It now includes digital and strategic dimensions. This makes the Strait of Hormuz not just a physical choke point, but a multidimensional one, a place where traditional and modern forms of power intersect. And as the world continues to evolve, so too will the dynamics of this region. New alliances may form, energy demands may shift, technological capabilities may advance, but one thing will remain constant: the importance of the Strait of Hormuz. Because at its core, it represents something fundamental: the connection between geography and power. A reminder that even in a world driven by technology and globalization, physical locations still matter, that a narrow passage of water can influence global decisions, that control, access, and stability in one place can shape outcomes everywhere. And as we move forward, the question is not whether the Strait of Hormuz will remain important. The question is how the world will continue to manage its importance. Because in this narrow corridor, the balance of power is not just maintained, it is constantly negotiated. The Strait of Hormuz, the Silent Gate of Global Power. Episode 4, Future, Alternatives, and Global Transformation. The world is changing, slowly, steadily, and in ways that are reshaping the foundations of global power. For decades, oil has been the driving force behind economic growth. It has powered industries, fueled transportation, and supported the rise of modern civilization. And at the center of this vast energy network, the Strait of Hormuz has stood as one of the most critical gateways. But now, a question begins to emerge. What happens when the world starts to move beyond oil? What happens when energy is no longer tied so closely to narrow choke points and fragile supply routes? This is where the future of the Strait of Hormuz becomes both uncertain and deeply fascinating. Around the world, countries are investing heavily in renewable energy. Solar farms stretch across deserts. Wind turbines rise along coastlines. New technologies are being developed to store and distribute clean energy more efficiently. The goal is clear: to reduce dependence on fossil fuels and create a more sustainable energy system. If this transition succeeds, it could fundamentally change the importance of traditional energy routes. The Strait of Hormuz, long seen as a vital artery of global oil supply, may eventually see a shift in its role. But change on this scale does not happen overnight. The global economy is deeply connected to oil and gas. Infrastructure, industries, and transportation systems have been built around these resources for decades. Replacing them requires time, investment, and coordination on a massive scale. Even as renewable energy grows, demand for oil and gas continues to exist. Developing economies are expanding, populations are increasing, energy needs are rising. This means that for the foreseeable future, the Strait of Hormuz will remain a key player in the global energy system. Yet, while the world cannot immediately replace its dependence on this route, it is actively working to reduce its vulnerability. One approach is diversification. Countries are exploring alternative sources of energy, investing in different regions, and building strategic partnerships to ensure that they are not overly dependent on a single route or supplier. Another approach is infrastructure development. Pipelines are being constructed to bypass traditional choke points. These pipelines allow oil and gas to be transported over land, reducing reliance on maritime routes like the Strait of Hormuz. However, these alternatives come with limitations. They require significant investment, they have capacity constraints, and they cannot fully replace the volume of energy that flows through the strait. This means that while alternatives can reduce risk, they cannot eliminate it. The Strait of Hormuz remains central, not because there are no alternatives, but because there are no complete replacements. At the same time, technological innovation is changing how energy is produced, stored, and consumed. Advances in battery technology, electric vehicles, and smart energy systems are gradually transforming the landscape. As these technologies become more widespread, the demand for oil may begin to stabilize and eventually decline. This could reduce the pressure on key choke points like Hormuz. But even in such a future, the strait will not lose its significance entirely. Because energy is not the only factor. The Strait of Hormuz is also a strategic location. It sits at the crossroads of major regions. It connects important trade routes. It holds geopolitical value beyond energy. This means that even in a world less dependent on oil, the strait will continue to matter. It will remain a point of interest, a location of influence, and a symbol of global connectivity. Another important aspect of the future is resilience. The world is becoming more aware of the risks associated with concentrated supply routes. As a result, there is a growing focus on building systems that can withstand disruptions. Strategic reserves are being expanded, supply chains are being diversified, emergency response mechanisms are being strengthened. All of these efforts are designed to reduce the impact of potential disruptions. But resilience is not just about preparation, it is also about adaptation. The global system is learning, evolving, and adjusting to new realities. Each challenge provides lessons. Each disruption leads to improvements. And over time, this creates a more robust and flexible system. In this evolving landscape, the Strait of Hormuz becomes part of a larger story. A story about how the world manages risk, how it balances dependence with diversification, how it navigates the transition from old energy systems to new ones, and perhaps most importantly, how it maintains stability in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. Because the challenges of the future are not limited to energy. They include climate change, technological transformation, economic shifts, and geopolitical realignments. All of these factors intersect in ways that are difficult to predict. And in the middle of this complexity, certain locations continue to hold significance. The Strait of Hormuz is one of them. It is a reminder that geography still matters, that physical routes still influence global systems, that even in a digital age, the movement of physical resources remains essential. But it is also a reminder of something deeper, that the world is constantly changing, that systems evolve, that dependencies shift, and that what is critical today may be transformed tomorrow. Yet, transformation does not erase importance. It reshapes it. The Strait of Hormuz may evolve in its role, but it will not disappear from global relevance. It will remain part of the conversation, part of the system, part of the story. A story that continues to unfold. A story of connection, dependence, and change. A story of how a narrow passage of water became one of the most powerful symbols of global interdependence. And as we look ahead, one thing becomes clear. The future is not about removing connections. It is about strengthening them, making them more resilient, making them more sustainable, and ensuring that they continue to support a world that is more connected than ever before.